Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. Today is the first of many streams where I'm going to try slightly new technical and presentational things. So bear with me if something doesn't work out exactly as it should. The very basic thing that I've done that might interest nerds like you, because it does interest nerds like me, is I changed from a software video encoder to the H.265 hardware-based encoder on my M1 Max MacBook Pro. I used to do that when I started streaming. Then a version of OBS completely broke the functionality. Video started stuttering at the end. I switched to the software encoder. Then I switched back to the hardware encoder, but somehow the software encoder was still on when I looked today into OBS. So I hope that hardware encoding still works. If not, I will have to return to the software encoder in future streams. But yeah, I really hope it all works out, because it definitely should help at least a little bit with quality. The next thing is, and it should be pretty obvious to anybody who has watched a couple of my streams, you can see now my entire screen, which of course is not my native over 16 by 10 aspect ratio of my MacBook Pro. Thanks to Better Display, the app, which I got in the Pro version, I actually changed my native resolution to 1920 by 1080 in HIDPI actually. So yeah, we are now native 16 by 9. That way, when we react to videos and stuff like that, we can actually click on a video, right? And we can go full screen on the video, and it should cover about 95% of the screen. It won't be 100% because of the stupid recording indicator that like goes into the corner and then takes up a little space. But that's still far better than what we had in the past, where I constantly had to readjust my YouTube size and shit like that. So yeah, definitely a lot easier to work with. So that's the two technical changes here. And as for content presentation changes, I do still plan on going through the regular stuff with of course, the latest news and reports and stuff like that. However, there is also another aspect that I would like to have to make viewing my streams more enjoyable. Now, I'm not quite sure how well that take off, knowing that, of course, the Apple community is a little bit different than a lot of like the Twitch user community and stuff like that. But if you'll bear with me, if you actually enjoy it, in the future, I can do some streaming of games parallel to my talking about the issues. So however we want to change that or not in the future will be up to you. Not gonna make any polls or anything about it right away. Let's see how that performs over a week or two, or even let's say up until the end of the year, and then we'll of course see if you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you want me to continue this. Yeah, but definitely, like if you look here, now I did want to install Resident Evil 4 to play the Mercenaries mode, but somehow my MacBook, I think I turned on to continue downloads when I closed the display lid at some time for stupid battery saving like bullshit. And yeah, so unfortunately I did not have it downloaded, plus I would need to purchase it first. So Vampire Survivors it is, which unfortunately, despite of course being on iOS, despite being on Apple Arcade, on macOS requires you to go to the stupid Steam client, and of course any time you turn it on, the Steam client has to jump up. So yeah, whenever people say, oh, site loading has only benefits, yeah, go F yourself. Like, it's not like I dislike Steam in general, but like the Steam client on macOS is terrible. It has gotten a bit better, but it's still slow and unreliable. Yeah, but so I will be able to give you definitely now a more complete impression of like gaming on Mac, for example, if we keep this up. Of course, because over time we would have to try new games. We would have to try new experience here. Check it out. So yeah, let me know what you would like to see me play. Donate so I can actually buy the games and stuff like that. So there's a lot here to consider. And as always, before we get fully started with the actual news today, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it, and of course, comment in the comment section. I love interacting with your opinions, debating you guys and stuff like that. And beyond all that, you can also become a direct supporter, send a small donation as a super chat or a super sticker. Become a channel member right here on YouTube. Shout out to Angelica joining the chat, saying it's nice to see me. Well, it's nice to see you join. And of course, you can also become a supporter over on Patreon. Shout out to Angelica, Max, Maximus, and Steve, who are all MarkTech Pro Max direct supporters right here on YouTube. So we have actually quite a bit. Now, we don't have any hard news, I would call them. There isn't any like rumor from like the highest source, of course, of divination from us, from the likes of Mark Gurman. But we actually do have some reports from people I do usually trust, even to a degree above Mark Gurman, mainly Ross Young. We also have further details which do contradict previous details we have gotten about the iPhone 17 Pro models. This to me makes a lot more sense than what we have discussed last time. And I wouldn't call Intel like an Apple competitor, but there's definitely a lot happening at Intel right now. So, for example, their CEO, Pat Gelsinger, after just 3 years resigned. He was really known as being like the engineer CEO. Like he was actually like an engineer at Intel. He wasn't like a guy from financials or whatever, or from corporate management. And then he became the CEO. There was a lot of hype about it. He promised that he would like get Apple to buy Intel foundries again for Apple silicon chips, or that Apple might even go back to their chips. So that's in regards to Apple. Of course, he also promised further Intel supremacy over the likes of AMD, which of course didn't happen. Their most ambitious nodes right now would be like their GAFET nodes, starting with 20A and 18A. 20A was cancelled. 18A is supposedly launching late next year to early 2026. So while I don't want to cover him too much, I think that honestly, that's not fully the nature of this channel, but I would love to hear what you guys think or thought of him. However, when it comes to just like big company and industry shaking news, definitely a guy like him leaving could be a big deal, because whoever comes in next could push for cutting Intel basically in half between like their product design business and their foundries business. Their foundries have decent tech, but they really have no customers besides Intel, which really begs the question, why have foundries at that point if they don't help you make your actual products much cheaper? Right? So again, very, very crazy situation. We have seen from NVIDIA, from AMD, from Apple, that actually designing your chips in-house, but then actually giving them to somebody else to manufacture it, frees up a lot of internal space. You can also potentially pit potential foundries against each other, right? You can say to TSMC, look, you know, Samsung gave us a deal where basically they're giving us the chips at cost. What can you do for us, right? Or even, oh, I went to Intel and they basically wanted to sell me their grandmother for 5 cents because they're so freaking desperate. What can you do for me that will make me stay with you, TSMC? So again, not saying that Intel is like now a dead man walking or anything like that. They just got like a financial grant from the US government with the Chips and Science Act, but definitely not a great situation. And you can also see this is a story that definitely transcends like regular tech stories. And you can see here CNN is covering this, the New York Times is covering that, Reuters covering that. So yeah, this is is why I definitely wanted to mention it. And actually, before we get into the Apple stuff, I would love to see what their latest announcements is like, which is after a while, they are finally announcing the second generation of their dedicated desktop GPUs, which their GPUs are called Arc. And the new GPUs they have are pretty cheap at $220 and $250. They're called the Arc B570 and B580. And instead of me reading out an article to you, we're going to check out how YouTube now works thanks to us having a basically 16:9 screen matching the output YouTube resolution. Before I'll do all that, there are 0 dropped frames thus far in OBS, so that bodes pretty well. I hope that my H.265 encoder works really, really well. And as always, let me know what the audio quality is what the audio quality is like for you, what the video quality is like for you, and of course, if my audio isn't too loud in comparison to the rest. Let's get started. Oh, and by the way, one last thing I wanted to show you. Look at freaking Steam, right? Like, really? No rounded corners? Like, what's this bullshit? Like, why can you not adopt the most basic design principles of the platform you're going to? This is just such... Like, can you even fully minimize it? Yeah, okay, it works. Well, that would have been really, like, I know they don't have all functionality that's, like, very macOS native, so I just wanted to really complain a bit today. So that being said, let's actually listen to a very reputable source here, Gamers Nexus, summarizing to us what the Arc B570 and B580 are all about, and then we'll see how we transition to the Apple topics, maybe some gaming, hearing your opinions, and stuff like that.
Today, Intel is officially announcing 2 of its Battlemage GPUs. It's the B580 and the B570. In a press briefing, Intel's Tom Peterson, who used to be NVIDIA's Tom Peterson, expressed confidence in outperforming NVIDIA's RTX 4060 in several scenarios. But he also said, quote, "We're crushing AMD." In one of the specific comparisons, so we'll get into all that. The cards announced are...
Well, yeah, AMD hasn't yet launched RDNA 4, so and AMD's actually low-end graphics card are built on TSMC 6nm node, which is, of course, in the 7nm class family, and this is a 5nm GPU. Or GPUs to be precise. So yeah, I assume they're beating like AMD's low-end offerings in this price range, and they do have more memory than either AMD and especially NVIDIA have at this price point. So I assume that would be the point, but let's see.
The B570, the B580 is $250 base, and the B570 is $220 base. Intel will be shipping an official model directly at $250, with more partners joining for this round to also sell their variations. There is no B750 or B770 or B790 announced.
Yeah, so no proper mid-range cards.
For the A750 and A770 that were well known last time. Intel's B580 launches on December 13th. The B570 should launch on January 16th or so. As for the naming, Intel continues to deviate from the norm of creating 9 generations of thin and then running out of numbers because 5 digits is crazy. Unless you're Intel, in which case you revert back to 3 digits plus a number and a couple weird
from the
words.
4900K to the 285K.
They're doing letters. So Alchemist was first. Next is Battlemage. Celestial and Druid should follow. Now, we're deeply concerned here because if you're paying attention, that is a lot of casters in terms of like RPG classes. And they don't have a tank, they don't have DPS, they don't have a healer. There's not a lot of options for the letter E for things that aren't also casters. Evoker, Exorcist, I guess Explorer, but like
really? Yeah, it's gonna be probably
really
something like Exorcist.
That they at least get a fighter, and then they can, if they survive.
Though there is a chance that there won't be an
E
generation. Yeah, that's a funny
and
joke.
RPG classes aside, Intel's new Battlemage GPUs will use a totally new architecture These follow the company's A series or Alchemist GPUs from the last couple of years, launched in 2022 somewhat silently with the A380. Let's get into it. Before that, this video is brought to you by Arctic and the Liquid Freezer 3, which we've tested using our standard methodology and found to be one of the
we're
most
going to
noise-efficient
be reacting
CPU
hard,
cores on
so
our charts.
we can
The Liquid
listen
Freezer
to
3
the ad.
includes rise and offset mounting to improve
Oh
AMD
Jesus, I
performance
haven't done
and uses a
PC
thicker
building in
radiator
such a
to
long
further lower the
time.
temperatures.
So much has
Arctic
freaking
priced
changed.
these
Everything is so
competitively
much
for
more
AIOs.
premium,
You can learn
but
more
also
at the
everything
link
is
in
so
the
much
description
freaking
below.
bigger.
All right,
I would
straight into the
always
details
be
today.
afraid of like
First,
just
Intel's
bumping everything.
$220 and $250 price means that the closest current competitors, barring whatever NVIDIA and AMD launch early next year, would be these. The RTX 4060 is currently around $290 to $300.
And it's an 8 gigabyte card.
The 6600 is $190.
And the 6600 is an 8 gigabyte card,
is
though
about
it's a lot
$270.
cheaper. Yeah.
Intel's own A770 is around $230. The 6600 XT, when it's available, is also a competitor. And then the RX 7600 is about $250 or so, among other cards. And these are just quick prices from Newegg. And now a quick recap of Alchemist specs for a reference point. So Intel's A580 GPU has an advertised graphics clock of 1700 megahertz with boosting up to 2000 megahertz per TPU's database. The A580 has 8 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory on a 256-bit bus, with that bus width being rare at the price class these days. 3072 shading units are on it. There's 175 watt TDP, 8 megabytes of L2 cache, 24 RT cores, and memory bandwidth of 512 gigabytes per second per the TPU database listing and prior specs from the ARC page. That's the second one is with a K, not a C. The first one's with a C. The new B580 will have 12 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory on a smaller 192-bit bus with 456 gigabyte per second bandwidth.
Yeah, so you can definitely see not everything has gone smoothly. It's a card that is a namesake, directly a successor to the A580, doesn't have the same bus width, doesn't have the same memory bandwidth overall, because you cannot really get that much faster GDDR6 memory without making it a lot without making it a lot more expensive. At that point, you're probably better off with just giving it again a larger bus and just using slower memory. But of course, nice improvement in memory capacity, which is cool. And yeah, HDMI 2.1 support and 3 DisplayPort 2.1 supports is definitely very, very much appreciated. Obviously, we have talked on this channel about both standards. What's interesting, they do advertise here 8K at 120 hertz over HDMI 2.1. My assumption is that they are talking here about a display stream compression. What does surprise me though a lot is actually that DisplayPort is supposedly limited to 8K at 60 hertz. If anything, like with the real bandwidth of 2.1, so I assume this is not the full bandwidth of the specification, it would actually be more reversed. So that is the thing that kind of jumps most in my face.
The Sparkle datasheet for its B580 Titan notes a 2740 MHz boost clock, which would be a substantial uplift over the A580's boost that TPU says is closer to 2000 MHz. The spec sheet notes 20 RT units, 20 XE cores, and a 200 watt total board power. Intel is still stating that rebar is required, which would be present on all modern motherboards and basically all relevant older ones. But if you happen to be someone who's upgrading something really old, then Intel Arc has been problematic if rebar is not available. We've talked about that in the past. As for the total board power of the Titan, which is a specific SKU that Sparkle's doing, it's not an Intel thing, Sparkle has room, like any other board partner, to boost higher board power for higher boost clocks and for additional overclocking overhead. And so you'll see a range of board power on the different partner models. This is the datasheet for the Sparkle B570 Guardian OC. There's no A570 desktop SKU to compare against, so this one's sort of out there on its own. The B570 Guardian has a 2660 megahertz clock, down 80 megahertz from...
By the way, also, like, look at the memory bus, right? This is why I'm trying to tell you. Like, look, I know they probably removed 1 2 gigabyte module and it's basically just like was cut down that way. But a lot of people don't understand that companies can do with memory buses pretty much whatever they want, as long as it lines up with how many modules they want to use. So, yeah, this is why I'm always like surprised when people say, oh, it has to be 384 or 256 or 512 for like high-end graphics cards. No, it can be ridiculous bullshit somewhere in between. And Apple can obviously do something somewhat more standard, like a 192-bit bus in between, which they did with like the M3 Pro. But they can technically do like 384 between like the Pro and Max chips or something like that. I mean, they kind of do already, of course, with the less populated Max chip, right, which doesn't have all the memory modules and stuff like that. So just wanted to point this out. There are a lot of ways for which you can play with memory bandwidth.
The B580 comparison we just made with one of Sparkle's other cards. It has XE cores down 2 units to 18. RT unit.
Diplomaster saying, Tech Jesus for Intel CEO. You know what? When it comes to management, like I'm usually against saying, for example, like I've had like discussions with people on Twitter, which are like, what would you do as Apple's CEO? And I believe my answer was like, probably starting to look for another CEO, or at least like a gray cardinal, like, you know, like leader that actually like leads. Because while I do count myself as pretty smart, and I do count myself as very Apple like knowing and stuff like that, I do not think I bring either the experience nor the actual like expertise in any specific area, be it engineering, designing, or finance, that would be necessary as to be part of to be an Apple CEO. Now, granted, I could create an interesting hierarchical structure where like the vice presidents of every individual like division are like very much more in charge than they are now. But I wouldn't want to be then the one who always decides it, because I'm like, what brain cell am I using to decide on this thing, on these things? So if I were Apple CEO, I would probably be just running around and just telling them, you know what, does it make sense to make this specific product, you know, a little bit higher value or something like that, without killing our profit margins, without angering like shareholders? Can we improve like working conditions in China and shit like that, right? That's the kind of stuff I would be doing, but like overseeing the entire company. Yeah. Tippermaster, I kid, of course. Yeah, I know you were kidding, but I do think that something like this can be a worthwhile discussion. I would like one of those golden parachutes one of these days. That's it, right? That's why everyone wants actually to be CEO. Yeah, absolutely.
Units are also down by 2. Memory is down to 10 gigabytes on GDDR6 on a smaller 160-bit bus. There is a 380 gigabyte per second claimed bandwidth and a 170 watt claimed TDP. Now, these TDP numbers will vary based on the partner model.
So it's a 10% reduction in cores, 20% reduction in memory capacity and bandwidth. Honestly, not too bad.
Press that it is using the N5 TSMC process. So Intel is not making this at its own fabs, but it hasn't for much of anything recently that we covered.
Yeah.
The die
Wait, this is, by the way, where like all those promises. Look, I know that Intel has like long-standing contracts with TSMC. They have to buy and therefore use some of their nodes. But like with Intel 4 and 3 being out, and 3 supposedly being like a bridge almost between like TSMC's 5 and 3 nanometer node, where Intel 3 is definitely worse than TSMC's 3 nanometer node, but supposedly better than at least TSMC's 5 nanometer node, maybe probably somewhere in line with TSMC's N4, maybe N4P, who knows, it's hard to compared Intel 3s on like some server CPUs and shit like that. But like I just like I sincerely want to ask, like, when does Intel plan to get fully back to their own foundries? Or is that also yet another sign that it looks pretty likely that they will have to spin off their foundries from their product design division?
72 millimeters squared. And Intel noted that this is the XE2.
By the way, the B580 here has 19 billion transistors on around 240 square millimeter die or something like that. So somewhere in the ballpark for both of these measures. That's terrible density for 5 nanometer. I don't know how much part of it is going away for like the the cache and stuff like that, which obviously doesn't scale that well, how much is being taken up by the memory controllers, or if Intel's logic libraries are still so undense that like this is honestly a very weird card. Now, the pricing actually suggests it could be a relatively exciting product, but if this were an Apple thing, it would be like way better per area and everything, but also way more expensive, but then also way more efficient, which also does have its advantages at the time when like energy costs are rising and things like that.
BMG-G21 SoC architecture. So the actual name is for the base chip that we're talking about. That's what it is. Was not intentional marketing, but we do sell dice, and sometimes they roll. All right, so we've previously covered architectural details for XE2. We have a whole video on that. It will be linked below. This information came out with some of the Lunar Lake discussion for mobile, where XE2 is already detailed. It's used in some other parts, and now we're just seeing it in desktop. But they are largely reflected the same way in the desktop version. Tom Peterson noted
the
that
difference with Lunar Lake, of course, being that Lunar Lake is actually a 3 nanometer like CPU or SoC. Like the only part of Lunar Lake that is built on an older node, which would be in a TSMC 6 nanometer node, is actually like its memory controllers, its I/O stuff, right? Its GPU portion is on TSMC's N3B node, so you cannot really like. Of course, you can make some statements on like how the GPU will compare like per clock, for example, but like you cannot really make statements on how power consumption scales, or even what clock frequencies you can target, because technically N3B isn't even the best node for targeting high clocks.
That,
it's
quote,
really
the
complicated.
Primary thing that we've done is move to support native SIMD16, which he says is the width of their instructions, and that's where they see some uplift. This is the full BMG G21 die at 272 millimeters squared. Various pieces.
Okay, what? How much?
BMG G21 die at 272 millimeters squared.
272. That's really low density.
Of this can be toggled or fused for Intel's product level decisions. The full GPU has 5 render slices.
Okay, so I assume then that it's really space inefficient because it potentially has a lot of interconnect area, right? So that it can be fused into like SoC like things. So maybe Intel could make like what would it even be? An Arrow Lake, like a desktop Arrow Lake like CPU combined with like a BMG G21 die. That would be interesting. Would be definitely like, but then again, you would be then combining different nodes and stuff like that, at which point I would be like, I know that 5 nanometer isn't bad, but my God, 5 nanometer launched in 2020. Can we please move on with it, especially in more premium products? I don't mind it being in this, which is of course a $200 plus to $250 GPU. But if they were to start building it into laptops or something like that, I would be like, really? Like, really? You could not give us like something 3 nanometer at this point?
This is 20 Xe cores, 20 RT units, 20 texture samplers, 10 pixel backends, and 18 megabyte L2 cache, and 192-bit memory bus at most. This image shows a render slice for Xe2. Intel highlights native SIMD16 ALUs, earlier high-Z culling for small primitives, and an overhaul to the ray tracing hardware. All of this stuff we talked about in a lot more detail several months ago, and again, that's linked below.
Oh, I assume that the thing that they've also lauded over AMD in their marketing, because again, I have not been yet fully caught up on the story, is probably ray tracing performance, especially in this price class.
Xe core level, Intel has 8 512-bit vector engines, 8 2048-bit XMX engines, and what it noted is a larger 256 kilobyte shared L1 cache. There was a heavy focus on ray tracing in its briefing. Intel pointed to a 1.5x increase in traversal pipelines, 1.5x increase in box intersections to 18, doubling in triangle intersections to 2, and doubling of BVH cache.
Okay, so I don't know which intersections exactly AMD is targeting to double with RDNA 4. but that definitely bodes well for Intel versus like RDNA 4. Just not the higher end RDNA 4 cards, of course, because those will be way bigger, built on a newer node. Well, technically, they will still be on a 5 nanometer class node with N4P, but still, N4P is better than N5. I wonder if N5 also includes N5P for them, and it could technically not be that old. N5P, of course, dating back to 2021 rather than 2020. But yeah, definitely some nice ray tracing improvements. Intel already had pretty good ray tracing. They just didn't have the graphics cards to really show it off because their base rasterization performance wasn't that impressive. But yeah, in this price range, they will probably have the best ray tracing GPUs.
Cache to 16 kilobytes. Sparkle also sent us this roadmap. There are some minor discrepancies from the data sheets as some of the information was not final at the time of us receiving it. This should all get locked in within the next days, though. Sparkle notes an HDMI 2.1 maximum support and DP 2.1 support. The card dimensions are listed as 2.2 slots. This particular model lists a 2800 MHz boost clock and 210 watt TDP, suggesting there may be some OC headroom as well. Intel has also told us that the B580 and B570 are running a PCIe Gen 4x8 configuration. This is something they directly noted to us, but that's a factor we'll talk about more in the review discussion. Okay. Intel's positioning B580 as a direct competitor.
It shouldn't be limited from the speed of a PCIe 4x8 bus, but it definitely like so they probably just wanted to make it really small, so it's not like at PCIe 3x16. Like most GPUs have like 16x slots, so I mean they they could have made it PCIe 5 8x8 slots, which then also translates to PCIe 4x16. But yeah, that would probably be a bit too ambitious for these small GPUs.
The RTX 4060, but they're doing it specifically at 1440p. It wasn't a lot of discussion about 1080p. Intel's reasoning for this, it's like anytime a manufacturer pulls a resolution out of a hat, that one looks good for them, and then they find the justification for it. So in this instance, the sales data supports a trend towards finally higher resolution displays, despite still a lot of market saturation for 1080p.
That I don't actually care about, because if you're marketing 1440p, like if you're a PC gamer, you should know that if 1440p is marketed, you can still use it for 1080p. And the 1440p is marketed as like 120 FPS, but like with low freaking settings, you can say, oh, but my 1080p display will still give me 120, but I can then play it on high or something like that. Or I can even like maybe do like rely on VRR and play it more at like 90 hertz, but jump to ultra settings or something like that. Plus it will give me headroom to run potentially 2 displays, or change to an ultra wide, or of course change to a higher resolution panel down the road. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't call this like bad that they're focusing on 1440p in marketing, despite there still being a lot of 1080p gaming monitors out there.
And so that's their reasoning for it. Now, the company stated that the larger frame buffer is particularly beneficial versus the 4060's more limited 8 gigabyte frame buffer.
True.
Where in certain situations, Intel is able to outperform and make use of that. So we'll run our own numbers, but let's take a look at theirs just to set the expectations and know what our benchmark is.
Guys, to anyone just watching right now, please leave a like, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. Comment, as I always say, I love interacting with a lively live chat, love hearing your opinions, love debating you a little bit, love getting your impressions and suggestions for further videos. And of course, you can leave a small donation in the form of a super chat, super sticker, become a channel member directly here on YouTube, or a supporter over on Patreon. However you want to help, any support is very much appreciated.
To validate against in a few weeks. The first party image here claims that at 1440p and high quality in Forza Motorsport, the B580 is showing with Ultra RT a 64.5% improvement, going to 51 from 31 FPS. With high RT, we see
the fact that there's anything in which it loses to the terrible RTX 4060 is honestly so bad in my opinion. Look, I know the problem is probably not even the GPU. It probably has more something like the game optimization for like Intel in general, but yeah, like just doesn't look too good. Look, I know that their point is like, look, we are so much better in ray tracing, probably also because ray tracing uses like more memory, right? Oh, it's not probably. Okay, that's actually useful data. Thank you. But why were you losing here? Like, I mean, you're a much newer card. I mean, I could explain you why. This is technically Nvidia's architecture is still way better. Plus, it's a 4 nanometer card rather than a 5 nanometer card. So, again, not downplaying it, but these gaps, those are reached because of the memory limitations.
The B580 improving by 12.3%, going to 64 FPS from 57. We're not sure how their 116 number was calculated here, but we're just doing all the math ourselves for the FPS numbers so that it's treated consistently and fairly. And then for high without RT, the difference has the 4060 in the lead here at 86 to 77, which is about an 11.7% improvement over the B580 with the 4060 in an advantage. This particular slide is actually really cool. I like this one. It shows some interesting stuff. So this shows an intra-frame analysis from a single frame ripped out of a Fortnite session at 1440p. The horizontal axis is for the API call execution by count, with the vertical axis representing time. And here, since it's one frame, we're seeing one entire frame time. The wider of these lines shows an A-series GPU against B-series. The native execute indirect benefit is shown as 1.16 milliseconds initially. Then if we're reading this right, it continues to accumulate benefit with render base pass. After that, the deferred lighting pass sees a reduction in frame time requirement of 0.29 milliseconds at the spike where it begins to happen, with another 0.41 millisecond reduction during volumetric fog for UAV L1 caching. There are other gains not specifically listed here, but they are shown in the total frame time number. Lower is better, as always, for these. We just thought it was a cool illustration to see of what's happening within a frame, because what they're basically doing
this is the kind of stuff that I won't comment on too much. Obviously, I know the very basics of the render pipeline and stuff like lower frame times be better, especially if they be stable. yeah. But yeah, it's definitely very interesting to see them very much directly comment on this. And Intel has been pretty aggressive in actually pushing tools to monitor frame times, frame rates more properly in recent years. So in that regard, yeah, thanks for them for actually encouraging like actually good benchmarking in the future, hopefully, by saying, you know what, we have changed these things. Like, you should look into those things. And yeah, maybe your gaming experience is actually more improved by stuff like that than a nominally faster frame rate. I'd be curious to see such a thing for M4. Yeah, that I actually think. I think Apple has actually done certain documentation, definitely not that detailed. Back in when like the A series chips started coming out, and they were doing like some metal documentation for like best practices and stuff like that, and they were talking about like how the tile-based rendering helps and stuff like that. If anybody remembers, that's actually a lot of Max Tech's videos, right, where they were talking a lot about like Apple's master plans and ARM will replace x86 and why Apple can game now, right? You remember all those videos from like early 2021, 2022, and a lot of that was based on them going through basically developer files from WWDC and one dub, next dub, and stuff like that, and actually trying to analyze, granted on a pretty amateurish level, but probably that's the same level I would be able to provide here. Definitely with somebody like Steve from Gamers Nexus here, I would love, this is why I'm always angry that people like this are not covering Apple at least a bit, like every quarter or so, because I'm like, guys, you have the expertise, you actually care about gaming, you care about hardware. Here you have like a chip based on the latest nodes. It has like the widest encode, like decode frontline of any chip in the market, right? Like 10 wide decode. It has like a ton of cache, a ton of system level cache shared between CPU and GPU. It's not just based on the latest node, but it's actually a very low power architecture. Like, do you not want to play around with it? Like, I don't get it. Like, do you not want to see the industry, like try to analyze the actual chips and create tools that actually help us monitor all that stuff? I mean, Apple themselves, because there was finally more enthusiasm from both developers and consumers alike, created tools like the Metal HUD overlay, right? Yeah, I know that it was basically one guy at Apple that really pushed for a lot of it, and unfortunately he is gone. But it's not like Apple's other executives do not play games. Everybody plays games at this point. And certainly like both hardware engineers and chip designers and stuff like that, of course they at least want to see how everything performs. I'm pretty sure Apple has great internal metric tools to evaluate stuff like that. So I'm just a little confused why, and yeah, Apple could launch this themselves, but I'm just confused why, like Gamers Nexus, Hardware Unboxed, even Linus Tech Tips, who does review Apple hardware, but why they don't try to analyze it as thoroughly as they do Windows. And I think a lot of that is based that technically even the most deep analysis for a lot of like Windows hardware is happening with tools that somebody just downloaded from the internet, right? I know somebody write like their own shortcuts, basically, where you can force an app to do a specific function, and then simultaneously it turns on another app that measures it all and things like that. But nobody's gonna write like a frame time analysis tool for Apple Silicon themselves. At least I don't think so. So yeah, I definitely agree with you here.
Individual improvements and trying to say, the performance output is partly from this and this other
Another
thing,
reason said they killed an Antec. Yeah, an Antec was also the best for like power to performance ratio and things like that. Like they technically still used a lot of like standard stuff, of course, like Spec 2017, but they just really understood how to analyze it. With Geekervan, like you can always see that, for example, they use like the aggregate scores and stuff like that. They don't really go into the individual metrics that like an Antec used to do. They don't do power consumption comparisons between like, for example, even when you take like Geekbench and you look at those tasks that are now scalable matrix extensions optimized, right? Like a company like an Antec, if they were still in the business and still in the business of obviously like benchmarking Apple chips, right? They would really like try to isolate their task. Maybe they would go to Geekbench and ask, look, could we have a version that gives us really deep insight into like what specific task was using how much power? And I think that would legit push the industry forward and push the understanding of Apple Silicon forward. And I think the more there is to talk about it, honestly, there is more to get excited about. And yeah, Antec also wrote their own code. They, especially in the early beginning of, well, it's hard to say in the beginning of A-series chips and stuff like that, because obviously, even if you start at A6, that's technically far off, but it's also not technically the beginning. No, not A6. What chip was in the iPhone 6? The A8 and stuff like that. Yeah, that's when I remember like first actually understanding, oh my God, there was actually a lot of effort put into those things.
Whereas normally you just kind of hand wave and say it's all just architecture. So it is cool to see that breakout. This lineup compares Intel's B580 to the RTX 4060. Again, these are first party. We'll have our own soon. This is at 1440p Ultra. Intel claims that it holds an average.
So I assume that means it's losing to the 4060 in 1080p because they didn't just choose a higher resolution. They chose to put it at ultra, which obviously becomes far more memory intensive. So I assume the largest leads it has here, which the B580 is the ping one, like something like this, right, where it goes from 92 FPS to 121. My assumption is that this is basically like a memory limitations for the RTX 4060.
10% advantage over NVIDIA based on its cross-section of games, with the total range at 0.83x to 1.43x, so it loses in some as well. The company is also claiming an advantage in performance per dollar metrics, comparing to a $300 4060 and a $270 7600. Intel makes this claim for both RT and rasterization performance. Intra-company, Intel claims that its uplift over its own prior A750, which should be a larger GPU configuration, but on the older architecture, averages at 24% improved. There are no presented conditions in which Intel drops below 1.0 baseline, indicating no at least shown areas of regression. Now we'll briefly look at the cooling solutions. Starting with Intel's B580 model, which it says is limited, the card has kept some of the plastic styling and molding of the face, but moved to a fuller flow-through area. Intel has shortened the PCB, stuck with an 8-pin connector, and cut a large hole in the backplate to allow air to flow through. The shorter PCB allows this. In our testing under some conditions, we've observed up to a 5-degree improvement in 4090 class cards for this approach. The fin stack itself is simple.
I'm honestly, like, I think that the reason why a lot of companies don't do that is because I think there is a market perception that this makes the card less premium. But technically, when you think about like real work, like real airflow, yeah, of course it makes it's better to cool it by having a direct throughput through a cooling system and then an actual exhaust at the other side, rather than it first having to hit like the plastic shroud in the back and then having to travel on top, or you have to design the cooling system in a way where you bend your heat pipes and shit like that, the way that all then goes up to the top, which makes it, of course, much more expensive and stuff like that. Yeah, like I like this design a lot.
GPU coolers, Intel had some significant assembly challenges last time.
Yeah,
we don't know from here if those are improved. Board partners will have their own designs, like Sparkle's Titan OC lineup with 3 fans. I was also really interested to hear about overclocking. It was actually somewhat exciting that this made it into the presentation, because overclocking often gets a backseat to things. It's really fun to do if you have the time for it, you want a hobby, but it's got to be well supported for it to be fun. So overclocking at launch with Alchemist last time had a lot of issues. The software was incredibly broken. We revisited the software twice, and by the second time they had really improved a lot. But overclocking still left a lot to be desired.
Okay, so I think that's where we probably got enough info. I hope the stream works well thus far. Again, I've talked about how the stream now utilizes H.265 hardware encoding. So how I changed like the display aspect ratio for you guys. So I hope that's all coming together to a cohesive package. Yeah, I'm definitely hoping that it all works out for you and for me. Now, this was of course very like Apple adjacent stuff. I'm not saying that I'm not excited about this at all. Now, granted, if I were in the PC market, I would definitely not be buying either card. But I do think they are interesting, and in the state of the market where there are basically 2 big companies left when it comes to GPUs, with AMD and NVIDIA holding like an over 70% market share, sometimes over 80%. I would definitely appreciate anything that can bring value to lower end customers. This is why I'm a fan of still cheaper Androids existing. I just always want them to be balanced products rather than a product that like, look, it has a 6.5-inch, 120 hertz display with 1,000 nits and everything. And then it's like powered by the lowest freaking end processor that cannot even handle 120 FPS in the regular operating system, like regularly hits bottlenecks across whatever task you're hitting it with. And I'm like, really? You couldn't make the product like, you know, the screen a little bit worse or something like that? So this definitely seems balanced, like in comparison to like the RTX 4060, which of course does limit its own performance by going with 8 gigs of memory. The same goes for the AMD 6600. So yeah, hopefully that also bodes well for RDNA 4 smaller cards, and of course RTX 5000 cards. Or even like what I would assume will happen is I assume that a lot of the lower end from NVIDIA might actually be covered by cheaper RTX 4000 cards rather than designing new dies on the newer nodes and stuff like that. Granted, the node improvement isn't that big even from RTX 4000 to 5000, but I get you get what I mean, right? Wherever NVIDIA can save cost on like us, it's regular people, that's what they will do, because they are now very much like an AI server focused company in every way. So, but let's get to the Apple stuff here. First is actually coming from Ross Young, so a source that I very, very much trust. He recently outlined that the foldable market actually looks to decline. That it definitely hasn't grown like crazy, but now it's actually on a decline course. Not too surprised, especially given that like kind of the flagship bearer of this category is, or at least was, Samsung, and the Galaxy Z Fold definitely didn't get many improvements over the last few years. Now they launched like the Galaxy Z Fold SE and something like that, so a little bit more ambitious with like slightly larger screens and everything, but it's not actually game changing, right? So, and of course we have discussed that Apple might launch like a Galaxy Flip like product, right? Like an old Motorola Razr, basically like very compactness focused in a way. And I have said that this is stupid because I have always said this is the product category that makes the least amount of sense to me. You basically have to use a regular flagship, but you have to make it super duper ultra thin so that when it's folded up, it's not ridiculously thick. You have to sacrifice internal space on the hinge here, so you cannot even put as much hardware as an equally sized flagship. Now, it's actually going to cost as much or more than that flagship because that hinge is expensive as F, right? So that internal space that was eaten up by that and by the thinness that you target goes into either smaller batteries, lesser cooling, or worse cameras usually, right? That's, of course, or like everything, to be honest, worse speakers, whatever you want, right? Or you just, I don't know, make it super duper more expensive. I have no idea. So of course, and on the from the back side with the screen on the front, you actually also end up taking up internal space because now, except for just like the outer glass, you actually have a display on it, which needs its own display controller, small amount of extra cooling and things like that. So I always hated that flip-like form factor. But now, according to Ross Young, who says that he expects a 30% growth for the industry in 2026 and a 20% growth in 2027 and 2028, is actually that Apple is working on a device that could have a 7.9 to 8.3 inch display and a clamshell design more similar to the, not a clamshell design like the Galaxy Z Flip, but actually a fold design. What would it even be called? I always like, what is the correct name? Because technically, from the perspective, anything can be a clamshell, just a slight aspect ratio change. So it would fold half and vertically. I used like a very nice renderer. Thank you to Forbes for actually making it. That was the best iPhone Fold render I have seen. I definitely did not do this by myself, and I put this in the thumbnail. Shh, guys. Yeah, so 7.9 to 8.3 inches, that definitely lines up with the current Galaxy Z Fold. Now, some other devices tried more like passport-like almost form factors where the screen isn't as tall as it is on the Galaxy Z Fold. But now we also have designs like the tri-fold shit from Huawei and stuff like that. So there's definitely a lot of opportunity here. People will probably complain if this launches that, oh my god, why is this not like a complete game changer? Why is this just coming out 8 years after Samsung's Folds and stuff like that? And the honest answer is that Apple didn't need to do it, right? And over the last 2 years, I would say the creases have improved. They still aren't good enough, in my opinion, but we have seen some Chinese companies try tech that definitely makes it a little bit more bearable. And I believe the Galaxy Z Fold SE also does it better. Let me look. Galaxy Z Fold SE. Why is it always German after clicking 20 times to enable English? So change to English. Right, so you can see that would be about what Apple is targeting. Of course, I know you guys know this form factor. Anybody who follows the industry does. But actually, let's look at what the Z Fold SE review. Is there one? Like, I believe it's market exclusive. Average that. That's just a regular Z Flip and Fold. Okay, so wait, is it exclusive to Korea or something like that? Galaxy Z Fold Special Edition. Why? You see, I clicked on English and it still doesn't give me English. Exclusive. Jesus Christ, it's still all German. Like I really like whatever Google does with like their like targeting of IP addresses is just so stupid. 9 to 5 Google. Let's see what they had to say about it. So that is a Korea model. Okay, so it's just Korea exclusive. So it's basically like a low availability local exclusive, unfortunately. But yeah, that would be a little bit what Apple is targeting. Of course, this is not a device you should be buying. It comes with 165 gigabytes of memory. You heard it here, guys, and an 8 Gen 3 SoC. So this is not definitely the best foldable you can get. We of course looked into like Mr. Who's the Boss's like annual reviews of like or like his best of year list recently, and he didn't give the Z Fold the flagship, though he said he might have given it to the SE if he had like access to it. So again, nothing too crazy. I definitely would, if Apple does actually foldables, I definitely would prefer this. I think this also proves that whenever you look at rumors, you really need to understand how rumors often come about, which is Apple experiments with pretty much every form factor in the background. And some prototypes will get closer to seeing the light of day, but without actually seeing the light of day. With the iPhone SE, with the iPhone Air actually for next year, I actually wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the things we are discussing right now will not come to the iPhone Air, right? That it might be less ambitiously thin and stuff like that, but actually also less compromised. But and the reason why the rumors were still technically not wrong would be because Apple considered those things, right? Considered making it between 5 and 6 millimeters thick or something like that, all right? So, and the same thing goes with Apple's foldable, right? Apple definitely considered a flip-like foldable, but maybe now they're more like inching in on a fold-like design or something like that. Maybe Apple will just ignore this too and end up just creating an iPhone roll, right? A rollable design or something like that. which of course would be its own crazy thing, right? But yeah, this is why I'm just trying to tell you. This is why I cover rumors, but I also always am like, you know what? I'm analyzing this rumor today just from the perspective, oh, could it be true? Because of course it could, right? But I also analyze it from the perspective of like, oh, it could also be entirely false. So let us all just pump the brakes a little bit. Here with the fold-like design, honestly, I do believe this is more Apple-like. For one, I do believe this gives Apple a lot more internal room to still put in flagship level hardware. I do believe that it also just is good for Apple to have a device that they can charge more money for. While a flip device, yeah, technically they could charge more money for it, but at that point it would be a more expensive version of the iPhone Pro Max, just with lesser capabilities. In comparison to that, the an iPhone Fold, yeah, it might still have some compromises versus the Pro Max. It might not have the exact same battery life, right? At least for the internal large screen or something like that. Or it might not have the exact same cooling capacity for the chip, so it might have to run it a tiny bit lower. But I would still expect it to be in about the same ballpark for the final results, which I definitely would expect for a flip-like device. Which again, I said it time and time again on this channel, flips are terrible. So I know some people will say, oh, they're more for women or for people with very small hands. I'm like, you can buy a smaller phone. Once you unfold it, it's actually relatively huge. So you're far better off buying a 6.1 or 6.3 inch product rather than buying a 6.7 inch product that folds in half. Desert67, Mac users, activity monitor, what's your present memory used? I'm running 2 terabyte Safari, Norton 360 mail security video camera stream at 21.5 gigabytes of 64 gigabytes. Let me actually go to OBS. Let me cover my screen here for a bit, and I'll be able to tell you, because I'm actually not sure if Activity Monitor exposes any of my private data or something like that here. It shouldn't, but I don't know. Maybe it would tell something about my username or anything like that. Wait, Steam is Intel? Wait, the Steam helper apps? Okay, it doesn't show anything bad. OBS, making myself a bit smaller again. Wee. So let me look at my activity monitor. Actually, why not? So this is about my current usage. I'm utilizing. Let's switch to memory. So I have 32 gigs of memory. I'm currently utilizing 22 gigabytes of memory with zero swap on a 1 terabyte PCIe 4x4 SSD, basically. App memory out of that is 16.14, so that's more like the real usage. About 4 gigabytes between wired and compressed memory. And then you have another 10 gigabytes of cached files, which really isn't like RAM, in my opinion. I mean, it's great that I have the opportunity to do that with, but definitely I'm still very, very happy with 32 gigabytes. My next system will probably be like a 36 to 48 gigabyte system. My concern was that TBW usage, which eventually causes SSD failure. I really wouldn't focus on SSD failure. SSDs, like, I know SSDs can fail, but usually SSDs will degrade a bit. They'll get slower. They might show some errors. I don't deny that. But really, I have talked to people with Macs that are now 10, 12 years old with SSDs, and they're all perfectly fine. At least if they are not fine, then it's because the screen broke or shit like that. Not because or they got water damage or whatever, or they just got so slow that they couldn't deal with them. But actually, storage failure was never the issue in anything that I talked about it. And yeah, also like with CPU stuff, it's funny how actually like OBS is here using less power than Steam. and this is Steam. Steam is separate here from Vampire Survivors, which is an actual game. So yeah, apparently Steam as a client is still an Intel app. It's still like an x86 application. Yeah, and everything Steam involved, like Steam Helper and shit like that, is also Intel. Oh my god, I didn't know that it was that bad. I thought they said they optimized it for Apple Silicon. What happened? Did it unwrap it the wrong way? It doesn't really, but like, yeah, you can see that like it uses occasionally like more power than OBS, which OBS probably, if I were running like a software encode for my video, for my stream, would probably be the most CPU intensive thing here. But yeah, because apparently Steam is like garbage app, it just jumps up and down. Is it safe to say that 16 gigabytes memory users are probably doing swapping? Yes, not really because 16 gigabytes isn't enough, but because Apple actually likes using swapping. I know it doesn't show here, but whenever I have like a ton of tabs open, which I don't always do and stuff like that, actually it will do some swap even on my 32 gigabyte system. It probably depends on what you're loading into memory. Yeah, but I couldn't tell you in detail, obviously, what Apple's algorithm is for deciding when they will enable swap, even when the memory isn't full. But it definitely happens. I can promise you that. Yeah, so hopefully that helps. Supermaster, man, Valve didn't even bother updating Half-Life 2 for the 20th anniversary release to make it 64-bit. Valve didn't bother to do anything. Valve didn't make CS2 for Mac OS, even though it would be so easy. It's not like they changed the engine that freaking drastically. Like, I feel like at this point, Valve is just like, you know what? We know if we actually make Mac OS big, right, a lot of devs will start publishing, well, a lot of Mac games launch on Steam, right, optimized Apple Silicon made for games, but and not on the App Store. But I think if the market actually grows, those developers will start putting their things on the Mac App Store, for the simple reason that a lot of the normies are actually using the Mac App Store much more likely than Steam. So yeah, but like the fact that they couldn't even be bothered to make it an Intel app, to make this an Apple Silicon optimized app, that honestly is yeah. Thanks for the response. Happy with my stream OLED. Awesome. With your you mean your Steam Deck OLED, right? Because obviously that is different. I mean, this is like Valve made hardware. Of course, they're gonna put more effort into optimizing like Steam OS for it and the Steam client for like the Steam Deck. That's like the entire point of it. Yeah. And for Mac, this is why I'm trying to say Valve is not bad for what they do. It's what they do for Mac OS that is bad. So, but of course I cannot force it. But man, Valve has a lot of like their Steam helper, what the IPS server, and then Steam itself. Yeah. Again, hopefully this told you something. You asked for it, so hopefully that helped. Guys, we're about 1 hour into the stream. Please consider helping the channel, subscribe to it, like the video, share it out to anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment. You see, I love interacting with your guys' lively live chats. And of course, you can support us directly with super chats and super stickers right here in the live chat. You can become a channel member like Angelica, Max, Maximus, and Steve, or you can become a supporter over on Patreon. And by the way, like when it comes to Steam, it's not like Steam in of itself is like not doing what it's supposed to do. Thankfully, it had a time where it would just completely crash. Let's just give us a little bit of volume to play with, right? But there are optimized apps running through it. Look at this, right? No, actually, before that. Right, so 1080p. I run it as a maximized window, not because it's actually the best at this, but that's the most stable. Whenever I run it at full screen, actually swiping between apps will cause it to crash, which again, that probably wouldn't be happening if everything about it was hyper optimized, but that's still way better than the actual Steam client. I set it to 1080p because that's currently my laptop resolution, believe it or not, and I set it to 120 FPS, no VSync, so it can run unlocked, right? So in the future, now I'm open to suggestions for more games. I would like to maybe play, as I said, Resident Evil 4. I've been playing a little bit of it on my PS5 Pro in the Mercenaries mode, which runs at a nice 1800p on my PS5 Pro. So that's definitely nice. I don't even know what the resolution is at 120 FPS, probably around 1440p. Yeah, so definitely interesting. Bombards in the circulating zone. And yeah, I'm actually way better at Vampire Survivor than it looks. But I've played it a lot on my iPhone. I actually bought it even before it came to Apple Arcade. But the Mac app, unfortunately, does not sync with my iOS account because Apple did not make a deal to bring it to Apple Arcade for Mac. It came to Apple Arcade for iOS. There's still, of course, the regular app that you can buy. But yeah. Oh, and even what's fun, you can even like replicate touch controls with a mouse here, but obviously that's way slower than WSAD or the directional inputs. Steam with the Anchor dock runs like a champ, can get enough of MotoGP games. MotoGP is fun. I'm a GT7 guy when it comes to racing on my PlayStation. Man, it's gotten such a big upgrade on the PS5 Pro with like ray tracing at 60 FPS. There's like an 8K mode. It runs so much smoother now on the PSVR 2. So while I know this isn't a gaming channel, but I am interested in some games. And yeah, I do play a lot of Vampire Survivors, but I know this isn't a hardcore game. And I know that we unfortunately won't be able to test every game on Mac. But in the future, I would like to buy games for Mac that do come out for Mac, right? So while PlayStation will stay my preferred piece of hardware, part of that is also that, of course, all those Sony games come out for it and are best optimized for it. But when it comes to Mac, like a game like Stray, granted it took it a while to come out on Mac, but maybe I could buy it and we can play like a cute kitty game together. And there are obviously some other titles on Steam. Yeah, and I'll be taking suggestions, obviously. Yeah, so that's about what I could imagine us doing in the future. Again, this isn't going to be applicable, obviously, to every stream. Sometimes we're going to be watching YouTube videos. Sometimes we are going to be looking into activity monitors. Sometimes we'll just be reading a much more complicated news report. So we'll actually have to stay on Safari. Even if I had a secondary monitor here, which again, my iPad kind of is, obviously, which is where I read my chats, but with split screen, I can still use it. But that's not really comfortable for me to focus on the game and look at another screen. So if you have suggestions for games that I can play, or you have suggestions for just the setup, what I can do, I'm very, very interested. Now, the last rumor of the day that I would like to cover here actually directly connects to the rumor that we talked about in the last video, which is about the potential iPhone 17 Pro redesign. This comes from the Weibo leaker Instant Digital, so it's not a completely unknown source. That's why I'm covering it. Again, there are always some like forum posts and shit like that I will never cover, or they are from sources that are so reputable, so non-reputable source. I hope that's about the correct grammar. There are sources that are so bad that I will mention them and I will laugh, right? I'll probably still mention them because it's not like it's not that I'm hurting anyone, but this is not a completely worthless source. And also, thank you for Mac Rumors for actually doing pretty decent articles. Like I've seen some other website basically summarizing everything in 2 sentences and be done with it. Not that this is like the longest report, but I do believe if you're trying to do some journalism, you should try to provide context, add some extra images. So thank you to Tim Hardwick here, apparently, for doing a pretty good job. Before we get into that, there's also a poll running on 9 to 5 Mac. Feel free to join it and let them know what your opinions are. So would you likely buy a folding iPhone in your preferred format? I think I responded unsure or other, because my question is, how does it like relate to the Pro Max that will come out alongside it? Of course, if it replaces like the Pro Max, yeah, there's probably no way that I won't buy it. If it is as good as the Pro Max, but it's more expensive, but also offers more, then I'm very a yes, probably guy. And if it launches alongside the Pro Max, it is actually in some ways definitively better beyond just the form factor advantages, I'm a yes for sure guy. Now, obviously, this refers to my preferred format, which would be a fold-like design for a flip. It's a no, certainly not. And which design approach should Apple take? So most people, thankfully, oh my God, this is like Trump's election results, 49.64. Jesus, are saying fold. 33% are saying flip. I'm flipping out. And 16% are unsure, because what would democracy be without almost 1/5 of the electorate having no idea what they do prefer in the end? I think that, to be honest, for those people, though, I would probably have a third option for like actual products, and then a fourth unsure option, and the third one would be basically both are equally good in your opinion, right? I know some people who like own flips and folds, and people who like alternate between a flip and a fold, right? So they will buy like the Z Flip 3 and then a Fold 4 and then a Flip 5, right? So well, that's definitely not me. That could be an option here. But yeah, just wanted to give some context to the earlier thing we discussed, that it's not like foldables would not be received positively whatsoever by the Apple community. I'm just like really wondering, what exactly can Apple do here to really make it stand out, to still guarantee that they can get the profit margins they like from it, that they don't face like any durability issues. Now, granted, this is a much more normal rumor, right? Because we're basically just talking about like regular successors for the Pro and Pro Max. But similar to our discussions about the flip or fold, which form factor, we actually have gotten into some crazy territory last time about what the design of the Pros will be next year. And those reports were basically saying that the entire 2025 lineup, which of course includes the regular iPhone 17, that rumored iPhone 17 Slim or Air, and even the Pros, would be made out of aluminum, and not just aluminum like for the side rails, but that even part of the back would be covered by metal, and that metal would be basically obviously aluminum if it's also the metal on the sides. I speculated that it could look then a little bit like a reversed iPhone 5 design in a way, with instead of glass on top and bottom and metal in the middle, it could be metal on top for cooling the chip and the cameras, metal on the bottom, maybe cooling where the charging port is and stuff like that, and then glass in the center so that the wireless charging contact for the magnetic coil still work, right? Again, that was all speculative, but it might not need any more speculation, because according to this source, that ain't happening. So, of course, that last report we covered came from The Information and from Wayne Moss specifically. So, of course, the iPhone 15 Pro was the first iPhone to adopt titanium. Before that, Apple has used from the iPhone 10 to the iPhone 14 Pro stainless steel frames for their more premium models. On Apple's website, they regularly tout the advantages of titanium. They still do so on the iPhone 16 Pro, even. So it's not like they just said, oh, it's an advertisement point for the iPhone 15 and not for the 16. Nah, they made it for the 15 Pro. That was its main point, and kind of like the A17 chip. And the cameras, of course, always the cameras. While for the iPhone 16 Pro, the main advertisement point is, of course, Apple Intelligence. Then it's again titanium, and then it's the cameras and chips, because it's always the cameras and chips. So, Instant Digital doesn't agree with that reporting. Of course, the iPhone 17 Pro will still use titanium. This is obviously done with machine translations from what I assume is a Chinese Weibo post. Why would anyone believe it would switch to aluminum? Think about it, it's just not possible. Looking back at recent iPhone models, Apple has consistently emphasized the premium frame materials of the Pro series as one of its key selling points, from surgical grade stainless steel to titanium. If they switch to aluminum, how could they even market it? Now, the reason why just before I talked about this, I actually switched back to a poll about the Fold. I didn't do that because I forgot it prior, but actually because I do think that there is some validity in Apple maybe playing around with like aluminum bodies for more premium phones. They already are partially doing that with the iPhone 17 Air, of course, which probably is going to be priced higher than the Plus model in the past. But again, it has one fewer camera. So even if it's priced at the same level, it technically offers you less for the money. Again, we'll cross that bridge when we get to that, once Apple announces the iPhone 17 family and we see the final pricing. But I also think that the foldable devices are very, very much good candidates for aluminum or magnesium bodies, basically a softer, much lighter metal. Definitely durable enough still, but definitely worse than titanium. And the arguments for it would be basically, for one, the weight reduction, which of course there's a lot of extra weight that comes from components like the hinge, which the hinge would probably be like a stainless steel titanium combo. You really cannot cheap out there. But also, aluminum has other properties that where it's superior to titanium, right? One thing that we always bring up is its heat dissipation abilities, its radio frequency transparency, and stuff like that. So technically, if Apple made like aluminum frames for the iPhone Fold, right, and even covered parts of the back with the aluminum, they could end up with a product that, despite being thinner than an iPhone Pro Max, wouldn't, and despite being larger, of course, when unfolded, would not actually be that much thicker and wouldn't actually compromise that much on its cooling capacity. And obviously, by sacrificing some weight, or by giving up some weight on the chassis, they can then put in more weight through the battery, even if it still has to be very thin. I assume that by the time Apple switches to a Fold-like design, they would definitely be using like silicon carbon batteries with higher densities, better thermal management. So there's a lot that Apple can do to make a Fold work in a way I don't think a Flip could work. But yeah, like here I actually could see that happen, but just not on the regular Pros. I think that the Pros being like definitively like very much a luxury item, even if the Fold has a higher price, right? But the Pros would be like this shiny object. And I know, like, my best friend is a gay guy, right? He uses Pro models. And like, he will never use a Pro Max model. He definitely will never buy a Fold model if it comes out, right? Most of my friends are women. They usually are looking into a product somewhere around 6.5 inches. Now, of course, the iPhone is 6.9 inches. So some are saying, okay, I'll compromise. I buy the 6.3 inch Pro, right? Like there are a lot of people, of course, like markets where people are generally a little less tall than like I don't know, Norwegian Vikings or shit like that, right? They will prefer more choice with like the Pro model. And then of course if you make a Pro model, you kind of have to make a Pro Max model. And then you would have just a Fold that you could call the iPhone Ultra. And if the iPhone Pro Max whatever gen it will be still starts at $11.99 or hell even $12.99, and then it's like, okay, let's say it starts at $11.99, and then let's say Apple never drops the price of storage, and at $13.99 you get the 512 gigabyte version, but then the iPhone Fold, right, comes by default with 512 gigabytes of storage, but at $17.99 or even $19.99, right, that's $400 more. It's probably going to be like $200 more expensive to build. So while the percentage margins shrink, the objective amount of money you make per device actually increases. Apple likes targeting higher average sales prices. Higher average profit would also be higher. Even if the profit margin goes down a little. And at $19.99, it would probably have the same or even slightly higher profit margins, depending on the exact tech that Apple implements. Warranty repair pricing might be outrageous. Yeah, it could be shit like, like the HomePod repair pricing in the past, where it's like, oh, your $350 device, you know how much it's going to cost us to repair it? $350. But we're gonna basically give you a new one. Yeah, and I assume there would be some things like that. But Apple has also done things in recent past that make DIY repairs easier. Of course, the easier a DIY repair is, the easier a professional repair also is. Yeah, so I assume it will not be a disaster, but the cost could definitely be problematic. Now, it's important that he does argue here primarily from a pragmatic perspective. Like he points out the advertisement that Apple uses, the way that they just laud titanium as a great choice. But it's unclear if he actually has supply chain information here, which I think would be weird if he said it without supply chain info. But yeah, as an argument, it works, right? That being said, it could still end up happening. Maybe I would be surprised if Apple doesn't have a strong like preference for a specific iPhone 17 Pro design at this point, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they're still like maybe deciding between two different designs and shit like that. Maybe one that is more traditional like before and with titanium like 15 Pro and 16 Pro, or one that is a little bit more out there but does have its advantages in terms of weight and thermals. Yeah, so it's really, really hard to fully say where they will end up in. Yeah, also, thank you to 95. Thank you to Mac Rumors. Apple definitely has removed features in the past. 3D Touch, most famously, was introduced in the iPhone 6s, and then by the time the iPhone 11 rolled out, it was removed. The iPhone 10R before that also already didn't have it. Granted, after the iPhone 6s, the iPhone SE also didn't have it, but it's a different discussion. I loved 3D Touch, but I actually thought it was pretty intuitive. Like it took like one small video for you to understand the feature, but I also understand why some people were like, you know what? Why do I need to do it? I just click and then I swipe back, right? But yeah, Apple could definitely go back on a certain thing and a certain advertisement point, especially if everything else was better, right? If, for example, they could say, this new iPhone has twice the cooling capacity of the previous iPhone. This iPhone uses our brand new modem and doesn't just have 25% faster download speeds, but actually 40% better cellular connectivity strength. And a lot of that has been achieved due to our innovative back and frame aluminum design, right? And it still enables wireless charging with a beautiful glass centerpiece. That glass is our latest gen ceramic shield that is molecularly binded to the aluminum frame. That aluminum frame comes in two parts that are then combined beautifully, and but they are still easy to repair, making it actually our most environmentally friendly iPhone yet. In fact, we're also utilizing the highest percentage of recycled materials ever in a Pro iPhone by using about 80% of recycled aluminum for the new iPhone Pro, right? You can justify it. It's not like it's impossible. Yeah. Tipum is saying 3D touch still better than time-based haptic. Oh, of course, brother. Of course. Like, it's one of the reasons why I even still keep around my iPhone 7 Plus. And that's like, I just like to play around with everything from like but it will be changing hands soon. My mom needs a work phone that just does calls. Yeah. So I like playing with 3D touch. I like playing with the haptic touch ID button and things like that. Sometimes I'll just nibble around on the volume switcher and stuff like that. Not the volume switcher, the what is the button called? The silent ring switcher or whatever. Yeah, just saying. I fully understand your feelings, guys. Instant Digital has a mixed reputation. It's not a terrible reputation, but yes. But has delivered some notable precise predictions. These include the 2023 launch of the yellow iPhone 14, the frosted back glass on the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus. By the way, my big compliment, Apple, here to the frosted glass back on the iPhone 16 and 16 Plus. My God, that feels good. I just yesterday had an ultramarine in my hand. It felt phenomenal. The Apple Watch Series 9 being a minor refresh, true. Spatial video capture on the iPhone 15 Pro, the addition of landscape front-facing camera, and the iPad Pro's nano texture display option. So I would assume that his sources are very supply chain, right? And maybe he just gets a few parts here and there, or they report like, this display looked very, very anti-reflective, and then he reports on it. Obviously, he doesn't say, oh, I have sources showing me exactly what the chassis will look like. But I am inclined to believe that he probably wouldn't say it unless he has like an inkling on how exactly this will play out. Yeah, but that's probably about it for the biggest news and rumors of today. I would like to play some games with you. I would like to watch more YouTube videos with you, just not today. I'm still a little bit under the weather. I'm already starting to sweat. It's not because it's warm. It's not because I'm a pig. I'm actually a little bit sick. I just had some fever 2 days ago, so I'm still trying to recover fully. But I just really wanted to do all of these fun changes with you. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like. Let me know what you could see still me changing and implementing in the next few videos, or in general, right? What topics you would like to see me cover. And last shout out to all the YouTube jazz, liking the video, subscribing to the channel, sharing the video out with anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment, please. I know you guys love commenting during the live stream. Please also comment afterwards. That helps tremendously with the algorithm. Just a small hi or well done, whatever. Of course, whenever you catch me live, you can leave a small super chat or super sticker. You can become a channel member right here on YouTube, or a supporter over on Patreon. Any support, be directly or indirectly, or just you watching the videos, is very, very much appreciated. I'll see you guys soon. Not quite sure if tomorrow or on Thursday. Also, probably depending on if there are any surprise big leaks and rumors coming out last minute. Though we are at the end of the year, there's usually very little coming out in December. I assume by the second half of December, it will probably be pretty much dead silence when it comes to leaks and rumors. So this is why I also want to make these streams more entertaining, more engaging, more directly communicative with you guys. guys, more responsive to your requests, like what games can I play, what YouTube videos I can watch with you together and react to. And this is why I made some of these changes today. Hope they worked out for you technically and as an idea overall. That's about it for today. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for any kind of support. I'll see you guys soon. And this is Mark Tech tuning out.